Hey, welcome back to Beard Talk. Now this week we're going to get into some religious and political ideologies, why I have a problem with them, why I think they're dangerous and should be avoided, and how I ended up holding these opinions, I guess. Now, when I was younger, when I was in my late teens, I was quite the little socialist. I was, in the John Butler trio and all that sort of shit, and I thought Andrew Bolt was an absolute dickhead because he tried to spin a John Butler trio song into like hate speech. And I still remember the line. It was the line from the song, "We'll shoot those motherfuckers down with our positive artillery," and Andrew Bolt's trying to conflate that with, hate speech and inciting violence and bullshit like that, which even as a teenager I could see was fucking wrong. So then I went further along over the years and I ended up leaning quite hard to the right of politics. I specifically enrolled to vote against Kevin Rudd, being that he wanted to put the entire internet through a filter, and I think freedom of speech is one of the most fundamentally important things that we can have in the developed world. So at that stage, say me mid-20s, I'm nearly 32, I thought Andrew Bolt should have been president of the fucking world. I was the cunt saying, yeah, the coppers should be wearing jackboots like the Gestapo, stomping heads, and I was a dumb cunt, essentially. Now, when I started driving semis full time, which was about 7 or 8 years ago, I really got into podcasts, audio books, stuff like that. So, especially the last 5 years or so, I've really ramped that up, and I look at it that driving around in a truck, yeah, you can listen to 3AW, you can listen to your fucking R&B Fridays or whatever, but you know what? You're not going to gain anything from it. So when you're doing a low-skill job like driving a truck, there's no reason that you can't educate yourself a bit through listening to people smarter than you. So over the course of these years, I've come to the conclusion that religion's obviously some man-made bullshit. Now that started early on for me. I went to Catholic schools and it always sort of irked me a bit. No, I didn't get touched. Fuck, wish I did some days. I could have had a field day with those cunts. But the main thing for me was that they were all hypocrites. You couldn't ask questions. I got kicked out of that many religious classes just for asking questions and, shit like that. So from an early age, I was very skeptical. Like I remember in primary school, when I was moved to Hoppers when I was 10, I think, so I would have been younger than that. And I remember talking to a couple of guys there about, guys said, "Do you believe in God?" And I said, "Oh, well, I think so, like that's the going commentary." It wasn't long after that I realised, no, I don't think I do believe in this shit. Because driving home from school one day, I saw a Muslim. I said to Mum, what's the guy with the hairdo on that thing? Like, what's the fucking, oh, it's a Muslim. What do you mean? What's that? Oh, it's another religion. What do you mean another religion? Like, there's religion, and that's what God made in that, yeah? Like, and my parents aren't religious at all. Don't get that impression. Catholics are better education, apparently. So, once I found out there was other religions, I was like, well, that's a bit fucked. How does that work? Surely only one can be right. So I became a bit agnostic and then finally became a full-blown atheist, discovered the works of Dawkins and Hitchens and, Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett, the four horsemen of the atheist apocalypse as they're known. Then went on from there, started learning a lot more about politics and government. I'd studied economics in high school. I'd always had an interest in how that worked, and very complex topic. And once I started looking into it of my own volition rather than what's on the government schools education, which of course says the way the government does things, this Keynesian economics of absolute fucking interventionist bullshit, is not the only school of thought out there. That's where I started to learn about the Austro-Hungarian, whatever it is, school of economic thought. Hopper. I'm drawing a blank now because I'm trying to reference too many things. Murray Rothbard later on, all those sorts of intellectuals that were willing to look outside the normal structures of society and see a bit past the immediate, oh, well, that's because of that. Well, hang on a minute, if we look a bit deeper, this theory doesn't hold up. So, essentially, my course has gone from finding out that, Santa Claus and that shit wasn't real, and you're like, well, that's a bit fucked. Why would parents lie to their kids about that? Like, your job as parents is to give them the best head start in life to survive in this world you can. So I never understood telling them lies about the world and shit. Oh, you should see their faces on Christmas. Yeah, you should see the 10 years of depression they go through when they find out the world's full of lies and shit. So I went from that to, well, hang on, let's have a look at this religion shit. That's all a bit sketchy. If only one of them can be right, you can break down Christianity into, Catholics, Protestants, Lutherans, Methodists, as many different subdivisions as you like. Same with Islam. You've got, you know, your Shiites, your Sunnis, every other fucking breakdown, Wahhabism, all the different aspects of it. And the problem with any of these ideologies, much like a political ideology, which it took me a lot longer to realise was essentially the same thing, a dogmatic belief in a set of made-up principles. So, once I'd established that religion can well and truly go and fuck itself, it's sort of had its day. It's been very useful in the past for keeping communities together and that type of things, but I think its day is come and gone. So, I ended up looking a lot more into government, political theories, started reading about, you know, Karl Marx and all these influential sort of figures that sort of, because on the outside, socialism and communism, that sounds like a good thing. Oh, everybody gets to have a go, and the fatal flaw that it doesn't take into account is human nature, unfortunately. Creating any sort of centralised power structure is always going to end up corrupted. And you have a look at Lenin. He was, you know, born into a relatively well-off, middle-class sort of family, and he was worshipped by peasants all throughout the Soviet Union, much as a result of Stalin creating that and, you know, putting him up as a bit of a figurehead. But those ideas of Marx and Lenin led to more deaths than anything else in the 20th century. Communism. You look at the Soviet Union, you know, the entire USSR and all the horrific shit that happened there. The amount of his own people that Stalin starved to death outweighs all the Jews Hitler killed. Mao in China, fucking horrific. But you mentioned the Nazis, and it's, oh well, they're the most evil cunts ever. But what about communism? That belief system directly killed millions upon millions of people as a result of a political ideology that enforces a one-party rule, which is essentially what a fascist, like that Blair Cottrell cocksucker, stands for. Now, to me, there's no bigger insult to a free man than the notion that one group of people should be able to enforce their beliefs and ideals on the other. Now, any ideology, whether it be political or religious, has its ideas on how society and the world should be run. There's two aspects to it. One is how it should be run, and the second is how to go about it and how to implement it. And it's normally done by force. I mean, just this week, our own government's introduced laws that are probably going to have an impact down the track on what I'm actually able to criticise. It's all under the guise of, you know, espionage and shit like that. Well, the audiobook I've been listening to this week is called Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, or Mankind. So, there's a part in that where the author goes on to say that after September 11, there was, I've just forgotten the number, I think it was 700,000 deaths over the X amount of years following, due to, you know, war, all that sort of shit. There was 800 and something thousand due to suicide. So for all the talk about national security, the curtailing of our freedoms, our rights, everything like that that's occurred in the name of security, that entire time you're entirely more likely to die at your own hands than that of an invading force, of a natural disaster, disease, of anything else. Suicide is killing more people than anything. So, in a world where people don't have a purpose because we've lost this connection with religion and this idea of, oh, we need to work towards the afterlife, and the realisation that this might just be it, has had a big influence on communism and these humanist ideologies taking over in the 20th century. Now, from some points of view, it's sure, it makes sense. Well, you need to have some controls in society, and you need to have some, yeah. But who decides who has those controls? Who decides what constitutes hate speech? Who decides what constitutes inciting violence or discrimination? Or who gets to decide that? Because that's the most fundamentally important aspect of any of this legislation or this ideology or however you want to describe it. Because I have a very close held belief that people who seek out positions of power are more likely than not sociopaths. Anybody who seeks out a position where they get to enforce their worldview onto other people should not be trusted. Therefore, politicians in general should not be trusted. Because we're not able to govern ourselves or run our own lives, but somehow mysteriously we're with enough to be able to elect other humans, other mere mortal men and women like us, to make these decisions for us. It doesn't sit well with me, it doesn't make sense. So, what am I getting at? What I'm getting at is we need to have a really good look as a country, as a community, at the smaller level, at the local level, through to the national level, through to the international level of humanity as a species. Where the fuck do we want to go? Do we want to keep up this left versus right pretending there's an option? Because let me tell you now, anything that goes through Australian Parliament that further increases the government's control or their reach over our wealth, our interactions with each other, our physical movements, our speech and our thoughts. Fuck, I forgot where I was going now. Anyone that wants to have influence over that should not be trusted. It's as simple as that. Oh, we're getting a bit dark here, hang on. There we go. The fucking nighttime shine, how's that? So, we need to look at whether we want to live in a new world order, one world government sort of arrangement. Because the notion that governments protect us, or that police forces protect us, it's a fallacy. A police force is only ever reactionary. And yet in this country we don't have the right to defend ourselves, which is a fundamental loss of liberty in any reasonable person's mind. The ability to defend yourself. Why do our police need semi-automatic pistols, tasers, batons, whole fucking Batman belts full of equipment if there's no threats out there? Because unless people haven't noticed this, we've already got laws against murder, rape, all these types of things, and it still happens. So that's where the individual has to gain responsibility, regain their responsibility. None of this group shit, none of this, oh, well, it's men that need to do this, oh, it's women that need to do that, oh, the fucking X community need to do that, and Y community needs to do that. No, we as individuals need to be the best people we can. I honestly believe the only way forward for humanity, if we're going to survive past the next few decades, we've got to start making better people. And that's a large part of the reason why I don't have children, and I don't see it happening anytime soon, or probably ever. Because I'm one of those few individuals that looks around and sees, like there was a video on Facebook the week before last I was going to do a video about, but I just ran out of time and it didn't happen. But there's a young bloke and a young Sheila arguing over a kid, and she's belting him on the head while he's recording on the phone, and they've got millions of views. And look, that's what happens when children have children. You know, the cunts look like they're early 20s, like he's still wet behind the ears, this cunt. And she's out of her fucking mind. What chance does that kid have? Because the thing you need to take into account, if you've got children, oh, I've created a life, and yeah, like, congratulations, yep. You've also sentenced that life to death, because that is the inevitable result of creating a life, is its inevitable death. How many of you have actually thought about the world you're leaving your children, how and when they're likely to meet their death, and what you can do to make their life as, not as easy, but as fulfilling and meaningful as possible? Because I don't think a lot of people think about it at all. You get locked into a 30-year home loan with a predatory banking system known as fractional reserve banking. Google that shit if you don't know what it is. That'll frighten the fuck out of you. You want to burn down the Commonwealth Bank tomorrow, I tell you. So you go into a 30-year loan, you're a wage slave to the banks, you get nearly half your income taken from the government, various forms of taxes, income tax, GSTs, excises on fuel, you know, grog, smokes, all that type of stuff. Over half your wealth is going to a government that is only interested in restricting your freedoms. What sort of world are you going to leave for those little fuckers, eh? Everyone tells me, oh, you don't know what it's like, Benny, you don't have kids. No, I don't. Because I see you cunts going, oh, it's the most fucking, you know, important thing ever. So, I sent me kids to stay with the world's most successful child molesters, the Catholics, for 7 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's how much the most important thing I've ever done means to me. I'll leave it in the care of some of the most despicable human beings on the planet, and my cognitive dissonance will allow me to think I'm doing the right thing. How many of you cunts lie to your kids when they ask you questions about the world? Because you don't feel comfortable explaining these things to an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old or whatever. Your ultimate responsibility, if they've got questions, is to answer them honestly. Because if you lie to your kids, it's going to come back and bite you in the ass. I've seen it happen with people I know growing up, where their parents were over-controlling and gave them a false sense of, oh, you're so special, and you know what? None of us are really special. We're just hairless monkeys. You know what happens in the end? Everything goes away. Nothing any of us do matters in the long run. What matters is what we do while we're here. If you spend your time here working yourself into the ground as a wage slave to raise a couple of kids that are probably going to go nowhere because you've been too distracted trying to get that promotion, to get that new car to keep up with the Joneses, you know, the amount of people I speak to that, you know, blokes that I've worked with and shit like that, you know, oh yeah, my kids are, you know, they're 14 or whatever. Oh yeah, cool, when are you going to bring him in and teach him how to drive? And, oh no, he's too young for that. Like, really? Why don't you put a bit of faith and a bit of responsibility into kids from a young age so that they can see there's something to be gained from it? Because people that have never had any responsibility don't appreciate it. They don't grow from it, you know. When I was a kid, both my parents worked, both had their own businesses, worked fucking hard to make sure that we didn't go without. But it was a full team effort. We all put in as well as kids, you know. Weekends, we were at the garden supplies with my old man splitting firewood, you know, or driving the Bobcat, loading trailers with mulch and shit for people, like from a young age too. Finished school, walked my brother and sister home, walk home, I had my own set of house keys when I was 9 or 10. Walk home, light the fire, do what I gotta do, no dramas. The amount of people in this day and age, not 20 years later, that won't even let their kids go out and play in the street. One of the key things that really turned me around from being a racist little bogan cunt into a more open-minded, well-balanced sort of fella was I moved house, I don't know, even years ago now, probably 6 or 7 years ago. I moved into a suburb of out the west of Melbourne called Tarnee. Massive immigrant population. Some of the cheapest housing in Melbourne, most of them bought as cheap rentals by people out the other side of the city that couldn't give a fuck. And I ended up living amongst a really mixed bag of cultures. And it's my favourite spot I've ever lived. Because what it taught me was that for all my judgmentalness of judging people on their outward appearance and their cultural identity as such, I was missing out on a lot of good people and good conversations in my life. I think they were, to the right of me I think they were from Tonga. The left of me, I think, was a gay couple. Across the road was a Aussie woman, single Sheila, 2 kids. Maori's in the house next to that. A Maltese bloke with a Vietnamese wife on the other side. Down the other end of the street there was a couple of Indian families, a Sudanese family. These are some of the most interesting people I've ever lived around. I went down the park one day with my old dog Charlie, and I let her off the leash. She's a pretty friendly old cattle dog. Anyway, lost sight of her for a minute, and just talking to a couple of people as I tend to do. Fuck, where's me dog? Have a look over. Here she is, upside down. 5 kids piled on top of her, like leaning on her, pulling her tail. Each kid was a different fucking colour. You know what happened? Parents all come over, they were a little bit concerned at first. Oh, sorry, you know, but no, that's cool, she's fine, no worries. We all stood around and talked for a fucking hour or so, I reckon. And it was from that sort of point forward I realised the more I learn and the more I understand about the world around me, the more I know that I don't understand, the more I know that I don't know. So when I see fuckwits like Blair Cottrell preaching this fascist shit, it's like, mate, you're a dumb cunt. I used to be one. To be able to admit that takes bigger balls than bullying some fucking poor street performer at Federation Square because he's wearing pink. If your masculinity's that easily challenged, mate, well, I suggest you take up reading or something more productive with your time, because it's not going to fare you too well in life. So, that's just a bit of background on my political leanings, which I'm pretty much apolitical. I don't believe in the system. I don't believe in nominating 1 or 2 alpha monkeys to rule over the rest of us. I don't know what the answer is. I just know that the current system doesn't work. It leaves people behind. It leaves people alienated and not feeling a part of their communities, which is one of the most harmful things that we could really have going on. So if people don't have a sense of community and a sense of belonging, and that's where you get these terrorists and these horrible murderers and rapists and all these sort of damaged people, you know? And I honestly think the only way to fix that is to make better kids. You know, don't send them to Catholic schools, don't send them to government schools, fucking homeschool them, get community schools going. Teach people about life, don't teach them how to be factory workers, because that's how our school system come about, is to teach kids how to work in a factory. Sit in rows, do as you're told, eat when the bell goes. It's modern slavery. Like Steve Hughes, the comedian, had a great bit about, you know, it's just wage slavery is the same as slavery ever was. It's just they did the math and realised, we're going to give them a couple of bucks an hour, tell them to fuck off, sort out their own food and bedding. You're all free to go. See you back here tomorrow morning. You know, there's a lot of truth in that. How do we change it? Why are we all working, you know, fucking 40, 50, 60 hours a week? Because if we weren't, the powers that be would be in serious trouble, because if we had the time to sit back and have philosophical discussions about politics and religion and art and all of these fundamentally important things in society, we'd soon realise that the way we're doing things is a bit backwards. Well, it's a lot backwards, I think. The notion that we're a free country, it's not accurate. I was born and raised to believe that. That's how I became a bit nationalistic in my early 20s, you know. No, that's what Australia stands for, a fair go and, you know, all that sort of shit. And coming to the conclusion that it's mostly all just nationalistic propaganda and it doesn't mean anything. To be honest, that was pretty heartbreaking, because I'm a fifth generation Australian truck driver. I fucking love this place. There's a lot of good in this country. There's a lot of good in the people here. But there's also a certain element that like to focus on the shit. Now, if we keep focusing on the shit and, oh, fucking Muslims, oh, fucking Africans, oh, lock everyone up and fucking... I've said it before, and I've got a feeling I'm going to keep repeating this over the next few years. Divide and conquer works. It's one of the oldest tactics around. If people are scared of something, of some sort of threat to their well-being or their way of life or their, you know, whether that threat be immediate or whether it be existential in nature, are two different things. Of course we should have a defence force. Someone says, oh yeah, hey Australia, we're coming over, we're going to take over. Nah, step foot on these shores, we'll be waiting there, mate. Fucking shoot you between the eyes, not a problem. But personally, the second our troops go overseas, they become an offensive force. They are the ones in someone else's backyard shooting people. And I don't think that's right. I've spoken to a few blokes that have served and come back and got a bit older, and a lot of people are waking up to it that, fuck, I nearly joined the military at one stage. I was seriously considered, if my eyes weren't fucked, I probably would have. But again, the more you know, the more well-balanced decisions you can reach, the more well-balanced opinions you can hold. And in such a topsy-turvy world, maybe eventually someday we'll get close to some sort of truth, but I just don't know some days. I just don't know. I do have faith that we'll get through as a species for a while, but I think we've got to have a long, hard look at ourselves and where we want to go and what we're trying to do, because the way we're going, this country might just turn into some sort of nationalist haven, because people are easy to control when they're frightened. Oh, the Muslims, they're bringing Sharia law. Fucking, let me tell you why I'm not worried about that. Because if our society is worth protecting or holding on to at all, such ass-backwards ideas as a theology-based legal system like Sharia law would get laughed out of Australia in half a heartbeat. But if this way of life everybody's so concerned with protecting is so vulnerable to something so ridiculous, we need to have a real look at whether it's worth protecting and how we can create something that is. So, anyway, I'll leave it there for now. I might post fucking 25 minutes, Benny. Jesus Christ. Podcast. Coming soon, cunts. Got a microphone. My mate Lukey's on board. We're going to get into it. It's been a long time coming. I've had a weird year. So, I get distracted easily. I'm passionately curious. Oh, what's that over there? How does that work? You know? And I think that's a good thing. So if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have read a lot of these books. I wouldn't have been opened up to a lot of these different worldviews, and wouldn't have had to look at myself and my own, you know, dearly held beliefs and things like that, and would never have really grown out of that nationalistic thing that I still see a lot of people stuck in, that just got stuck there. They picked a team. Oh, Labor are the problem. Oh, Liberal are the problem. Government's the problem. Because the only people that want to be in charge of other people and enforce their ideals on them are sociopaths. That's the people that want to introduce Sharia, fucking Sharon's Law, whatever you want to fucking call it. Nutbags, sociopaths. You want to enforce your worldview and belief system on everybody else. Unacceptable. Whether it's a religion, political ideology. If it's so good you have to force it upon people at the end of a gun, well, I ain't buying it. Anyway, I'm back at my favourite place, Woolworths in Broadmeadows. Funny story, I ended up out here because apparently I'm banned from Coles in Truganina. So, having a bit of a shit stir with the blokes there the other night, and yeah, lady 50 or 60 feet away was offended by my language. Not appropriate for the workplace. Neither is trying to enforce your own fucking moral compass on independent people just because you're in a workplace, okay? You don't get to tell me how to express myself or what words I can or can't use. That's offensive to me. So yeah, apparently I'm banned from Coles, so now I've ended up having to do a fucking Woolworths time slot at 6 o'clock on a Friday night, so we'll see how that goes. Should be fun. Anyway, that's this week's Beard Talk. Maybe. We'll see. Now I gotta listen to the cunt back. Fuck me. Alright, peace, cunts.